If you ask the Russians, they say that sanctions have no impact on them and that actually it's the West which is destroying itself through imposing the sanctions because the West cannot live without the glorious and powerful soon-to-be ex-Federation of Russia. Now, the Russians, feeling bad for the West, desperately try to tell the West to stop with sanctions, and the people escape their mighty and powerful country to come to the weak and desperate West, definitely because they feel bad for the West and want to help the Western economies recover. Definitely this, for sure. Many people are not actually familiar with how sanctions work and what impact they can have. In this video, we will explain how sanctions affect Russia and Russian citizens, as well as discuss the main aspects of how sanctions works and what impact they have when used correctly. Wikipedia tells us that sanctions are a punitive measure of legal influence and regulations, a measure of coercion against a state that has violated international norms, treaties, obligations, special economic and other restrictive measures applied against individuals or legal entities under the legislation of a certain state. And this is absolutely correct. Now, there will be a small spoiler for most impatient. Sanctions work. Oh, and you need to hit that like and subscribe button so the mighty YouTube algorithm won't sanction me. I think many people have the impression that sanctions act as a universal tool that should simply destroy Russia in a short time, leading to their collapse and Ukraine's immediate victory. Though I wish it were like this, it's a little bit more complicated. Firstly, each sanction has its own purpose. For example, let's look at Iran. Iran has been under sanctions for a long time, but for some reason the regime has not changed. This is due, first of all, to the fact that each sanction has its own purpose. Yes, in 2016, as a result of so-called nuclear deal, some sanctions on Iran were lifted, but the sanctions were primarily related to the Iranian nuclear program and not all to the Iranian regime. In conclusion, it can be said that sanctions Russia has faced are not related to the overthrow of Putin's regime and his closest circle. Secondly, sanctions never aim to harm ordinary citizens of one country or another, but we all have to understand that the consequences of the impact of sanctions will somehow affect everyone. This manifests in high inflation, a shortage of imported products, luxury items, and even certain medical equipment, among many other things. Thirdly, the sanctions currently imposed on Russia primarily aim to reduce its economic potential and capabilities for manufacturing high-tech weapons and ammunition. Let's now delve more deeply into the anti-Russian sanctions. We should start from 2014 when, because of Russia's aggressive actions, the annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the undeclared war in Donbas, sector-specific sanctions were announced, which included a ban on investments and loans for a wide range of sectors of the Russian economy. There is an opinion that it was precisely these sanctions that led Putin to stop talking about so-called Novorossiya and sign Minsk agreements. Putin entered into negotiations mainly due to the sanctions, which now seems ridiculous, but at that time these sanctions scared the Russian elite. Also, this isn't the point of today's video, but I just want to point out at that point, Russia claimed it has nothing to do with attacking Donbas, and the Minsk agreements are exclusively about Donbas. So, what did Russia have to do with the Minsk agreements, which are about a ceasefire in the Donbas region, if Russia didn't have anything to do with the Donbas region? What do you guys think about why Putin signed the Minsk agreements, and what do you actually think about Minsk agreements in general? Please leave the comment below. Okay, but before we go on, I want to thank those of you who are already support channel. This allows me to continue improving the stories I bring from Ukraine. And if you enjoy these stories and would like to support this channel, you can do so through my Patreon or through Buy Me a Coffee. Links are leaving in description below. The next sanctions were introduced before February 24th, 2022, when Putin signed an order recognizing the so-called LPR and DPR. The sanctions included restrictions on banks, various individuals and legal entities, trade and investment sanctions. Germany halted the certification of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, and so on. After the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine began, other sanctions followed, with a complete list of which you can find in the internet. In turn, I want to focus on two key factors that affect the Russian budget, namely oil and gas. I recommend pausing this video, and the one about Putin you should watch that I recorded a little earlier, which will help you better understand the context. The link is just here. It's okay, don't worry, I will wait. Let's talk about the restrictions on the price of Russian oil. In 2021, the Russian budget received 9 trillion rubles in oil and gas revenues. And in addition to these revenues, there are a number of taxes within Russia itself, somehow related to these revenues. That's why the introduction of a cap on oil prices immediately hits the revenues of the Russian budget. Yes, the Russian budget can print rubles, but it will immediately drive up inflation. That's why the imposing of an embargo punched a hole in the Russian budget, and the Russian authorities now have to explain immediately how they will plug this hole. They have two options: reduce pensions and salaries to budget employees, reduce the funding for the security sector, or simply start printing money, but this will lead to immediate inflation. Currently, Russia has not followed in the footsteps of Iran and Venezuela, mainly thanks to its macroeconomic team, which proved to be more competent than leading bankers and finance ministries in other sanctioned countries. The Central Bank of Russia has managed to handle inflation, capital outflows, and avoid macroeconomic collapse, but the Russian economy is in recession. Such success was made possibly by selling oil and gas in 2022, when the price selling on oil had not yet been introduced and Europe was purchasing resources to successfully survive winter. If you are following the situation closely, you may have two questions. What to do with the export of Russian oil to other countries, and why can't a full embargo be imposed on Russian oil and gas? Unfortunately, it is impossible to completely remove Russian oil from the world market, as it would lead to increased oil prices in other importing countries, which is not beneficial to anyone. Therefore, Russia remains in the market, but is forced to regularly reduce oil and gas production volumes, and its revenues have fallen by more than 40%. In the second question, we need to touch on Russia's main allies in the East, India and China. India could, of course, buy Russian resources at higher price, but this could raise questions within the global community, so Indians buy oil at a lower price. The situation with China is slightly more complicated because Russia and China are connected by a pipeline through which oil is pumped, and sanctions do not apply to the pumped oil. However, China, which has no allies but only vassals, comes to the forefront. Therefore, Russia, which has already demonstrated its inability to turn the situation to its advantage, sells oil to China at a slightly higher price than $60 per barrel, but not so expensive that Russia could consider this a success. Now, I didn't mention this before, but I'm sure you know, the EU was Russia's biggest market by far for oil and gas, and well, you know already how that's coming along. And when I say by far, I mean by far. Currently, neither China nor India nor any other market are able to replace this, not because there is no need, no. The issue is logistics. It's not easy to transport millions of barrels of oil every day, especially when you have absolutely no infrastructure. What about transporting them on ships? Isn't that how most trade happens around the world? Well, my friends, this is where the beauty of sanctions come into play. Not only has Russia lost access to the Western markets for selling its energy products, trade insurance is mostly controlled entirely by Western companies, and the majority of the world's largest shipping companies are Western. So, even if Russia finds willing buyers, the insurance companies won't insure the ships if Russia is selling the oil at a price higher than the price listed by the sanctions. Oh, and even if it's below, many shipping companies don't want to deal with Russia. So, though the price selling is set as $60 per barrel, or a different price depending on the index you look at, in reality, a lot of Russian oil products are being sold at significant discount. Now, I'm not an expert in this field, but I also know that unlike Saudi Aramco, who are able to extract oil at some ridiculously low cost, the Russians have no such efficient way of doing this. The main goal of sanctions is to deprive Putin of resources to continue this very war, to deplete his war chest. No money means no ability to produce new weapons. Currently, something is being produced in Russian factories, but this something is not very much and not most modern weapon samples. A very good example of sanctions is Russia's need to purchase ammunition in North Korea and Iran, which confirms that these restrictions are most important and they work. Another significant advantage of sanctions is money, or rather its absence in Russian budget, as Russian budget is already facing a deficit problem that needs to somehow be addressed. Sanctions are not designed to hurt individuals. Sanctions are designed to cripple Russia's ability to wage this war over the long term, to deplete their ability to wage a war of attrition. And this is exactly what the sanctions are doing. Слава Україні!